Most
We have the
people
perimeter
picture a
secured.
drug bust as one dramatic raid. In reality, almost every case is the end result of a slow, layered process that builds for months or years before anyone ever sees handcuffs. Let's break down how this actually unfolds, level by level. Level 1, the nothing stop. At the lowest level, most people get caught the same boring way: a busted brake light, an expired tag, a lane change without signaling. The officer wasn't looking for drugs, they were looking for a reason to talk to you. Once the window rolls down, everything changes. Officers are trained to notice mismatches: someone way too calm or way too jumpy for a minor stop, a story about where they're headed that doesn't quite add up, a strong smell of cologne clearly meant to cover something else. None of that alone is enough for a search, but it's enough to ask for consent, and a shocking number of people just say yes. They think refusing looks guilty, so they hand over the exact thing that ends everything. Once something's found, the amount and how it's packaged decide whether this becomes a footnote or a felony. This is also where most careers end, not because the person was careless for years, but because they had one-off moment during one ordinary encounter, and there's no amount of planning that fully ensures against that. Level 2, the friend who wasn't. Once someone moves from occasional sales to a steady list of regulars, the danger stops being random and starts being personal. Somewhere in that list is a customer who eventually gets picked up for something completely unrelated, and suddenly trading a name becomes the easiest way out of their own trouble. It rarely feels like betrayal to the person doing it. It feels like answering questions. Once a name is on the table, the next step is almost always a monitored purchase, something recorded and timed so it can't be argued away later. What catches most dealers off guard isn't the betrayal itself, it's how ordinary the person was who did it. Someone who bought from them for years, who they considered practically a friend, will still choose their own freedom the moment someone offers a real way out of a real sentence. That's not a character flaw. That's just what happens when someone else's liberty is on the table instead of yours. Level 3, the shape you didn't know you were drawing. As things scale up, regular restock runs, a delivery schedule, a customer base too big to personally vouch for, the risk shifts again. It's no longer about one mistake, it's about the fact that routine itself becomes visible. A phone that calls the same 5 numbers in quick bursts at the same times every day, for months, draws a shape that's instantly recognizable to anyone pulling the records. Location pings tell the same story from a different angle, the same few spots, visited briefly, at odd hours that don't match any legitimate job. This is also the point where surveillance actually becomes worth the resources. Nobody stakes out a single small seller, but someone whose pattern suggests they're supplying several other people becomes a far more efficient target. And surveillance, by design, is invisible for as long as possible. The absence of any sign you're being watched is never proof that you aren't. Level 4, the lifestyle audit. At a certain size, the money becomes its own liability, completely separate from the drugs. A car that doesn't match a tax return, an apartment that doesn't match a pay stub, cash purchases with no paper trail, all of it generates records that exist whether or not anyone's thinking about narcotics at all. Banks flag large cash transactions automatically, and structuring deposits to stay just under that threshold is, ironically, its own red flag. Family and partners get pulled in here too. A relative suddenly making unusual deposits, or a partner whose spending clearly outpaces their job, becomes the visible financial signature of an operation that was otherwise being kept quiet. Investigators who work these cases will often say following the money is more reliable than following the drugs. Drugs get used up and disappear, but money leaves a trail that sits in a database indefinitely. Putting a car or a lease in someone else's name doesn't solve this, it just adds another person who, once questioned, has far less reason to protect you than you assumed. Level 5, the phone in your pocket. Digital habits catch up with everyone eventually, but the stakes get heavier as the operation grows, because one device now holds the record of hundreds of transactions instead of a handful. Messages that feel vague at the time often make perfect sense once they're read alongside location data and known contacts. Encrypted apps protect the content of a conversation, but the metadata, who you talk to, when, how often, is frequently still visible, and that alone can support everything else investigators already have. Social media makes this worse. Posting about a new purchase, a trip, or a lifestyle upgrade that doesn't match your paperwork builds exactly the kind of public timeline that turns Level 4's financial red flags into a story a jury can follow, evidence handed over for free, no warrant required. Level 6, the domino underneath you. Once other people are working under you, runners, street-level sellers, people who only see their own small piece of the operation, the most common failure point becomes someone below you getting picked up on their own and deciding cooperation beats loyalty. This pattern shows up in case after case, regardless of the city or the product. Someone facing years over a single arrest finds out exactly how much time a prosecutor can shave off in exchange for details about who's above them, and that trade becomes hard to turn down. Trying to insulate yourself by keeping everyone compartmentalized only goes so far, because the operation still has to run, which means information still has to move. Even someone who only knows a pickup spot and a phone number is holding a fragment, and fragments from enough different people eventually assemble into the whole picture, built from the bottom up rather than the top down. Level 7, the recording that says it all. By the time a case reaches a dedicated task force, paper trails and financial records usually aren't considered enough on their own. Getting a wiretap approved requires convincing a judge that everything else has already been tried, which is exactly why it's saved for cases that have already grown large. Once it's running, though, it tends to become the single strongest piece of evidence in the entire case, because it's someone's own words describing their own activity, nothing indirect about it. Coded language feels like protection in the moment, but once investigators have weeks of context to match a phrase against a known transaction, that same code stops hiding anything. It becomes the key that translates everything else they already collected. Level 8, the morning everyone gets taken at once. Once wiretap evidence, financial records, cooperating witnesses, and physical surveillance have all piled up, the arrest itself is rarely one event. It's a coordinated sweep across every address connected to the case, timed to happen within the same narrow window everywhere at once, because staggering the arrests gives everyone left standing time to destroy evidence or disappear. People caught in these sweeps often describe the moment as strangely anticlimactic. By the time it happens, the case was already finished, the arrest is just the last procedural step in something decided months earlier, long before anyone had reason to think they'd already been mapped out. Level 9, the whole story, all at once. At trial, prosecutors rarely lean on one piece of evidence. They stack everything, the old traffic stop, the cooperating witness, the bank records, the wiretap transcripts, the phone data, into one continuous story built specifically to survive a defense attorney picking apart any single piece. A witness alone can be discredited. That same witness becomes much harder to dismiss once their story lines up independently with financial records, surveillance, and a recorded phone call. This is also why sentences at this level look nothing like sentences at level 1. The charge isn't for one sale anymore, it's for the entire pattern the evidence adds up to. Level 10, the pattern underneath all of it. Every level here shares one thing in common: growth generates evidence faster than any one person can control it. A small-time seller only has to survive a single stop. A large operation has to survive traffic stops, talkative customers, financial scrutiny, digital trails, and disloyal associates all at once, every single day, indefinitely. Scale doesn't just raise the profit, it raises, permanently and proportionally, the number of ways the whole thing can come apart. No single mistake usually ends it. It's the slow accumulation of small, individually survivable risks that eventually stacks the odds against staying invisible forever. If this changed how you think about where these cases actually start, drop the next topic you want broken down in the comments.